My name is Jessica, and for years I believed I had the kind of love that others envied, the kind that felt effortless, safe, and unbreakable. When I met Daniel, he swept me off my feet with his charm, his ambition, and the way he made me feel like I was the most important person in his world. We were that couple, always laughing, always in sync, always planning a future together. I thought we had it all. But love is a fragile thing. It doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks in the smallest ways, so quietly that you don't even notice, until one day, you look around and everything is broken. The man I had once trusted with my heart became someone I could barely recognize. At first, it was subtle. Daniel became distant, distracted, lost in his own world. The late nights at work turned into excuses, the inside jokes turned into silence, and the warm affection he once gave me so easily started to feel forced. I told myself it was just stress, that we were going through a phase and things would get better. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. The moment everything changed, I remember it clear as day. We were sitting across from each other at dinner, in the same house we had built together, but it felt like there was an ocean between us. I reached for his hand, hoping, praying, that he would look at me the way he used to. Instead, he sighed, pulled away, and said, "Jess, I think you need to stop acting like everything is fine. Maybe we were never meant to last." My heart stopped. That was the moment I realized I'd been fighting for something that no longer existed. The man sitting across from me wasn't the man who had once promised forever. And worst of all, he didn't even care. But if he thought I was just going to sit there and let him destroy me, he was wrong. Because I wasn't done fighting, not yet. The days after Daniel's words felt like a slow-motion free fall. I wanted to believe it was just a bad moment, that he didn't mean it, that we could fix whatever was breaking between us. But deep down, I knew better. The look in his eyes when he said it, it wasn't anger or frustration. It was something worse, indifference. I tried everything to bring him back. I made his favorite meals, planned date nights, asked him about his day like I used to. Each effort was met with a shrug, a distracted nod, or worse, silence. The man who once couldn't keep his hands off me now barely looked in my direction. It was like I had become invisible in my own home. Then came the late nights. At first, he had explanations. Work ran late. A client dinner went longer than expected. I had a drink with the guys. You're overthinking things, Jess. The excuses were endless, each one more hollow than the last. I wanted to trust him. I needed to trust him. But trust is like a thread. It frays, it weakens, and eventually it snaps. One night, I reached for his phone. I told myself I wasn't snooping, that I was just checking the time. But when I saw the message pop up on the screen, my heart stopped. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." The sender's name was just a single letter, L. I sat there, frozen, my stomach twisting into a knot so tight I could barely breathe. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a joke, maybe it was a misunderstanding. But in my gut, I already knew the truth. I confronted him that night. My hands were shaking, my voice raw with a mix of fear and rage. "Who is L?" Daniel didn't look shocked. He didn't even look guilty. He just sighed, rubbing his temples like I was the problem, like I was being dramatic. "Jess, it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" The words made my blood boil. "So tell me what it is, Daniel. Tell me why another woman is texting you in the middle of the night." He had an answer ready, smooth, rehearsed. "She's just a friend. You're blowing this out of proportion." But there was something in his voice. Hesitation. The smallest flicker of doubt. A crack in his armor. I knew then. He was lying. And in that moment, I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't just a phase. This was the beginning of the end. After that night, everything changed. Or maybe I had just started seeing things for what they really were. The man I once trusted with my heart had become a stranger, sleeping in my bed. And I was no longer sure if I wanted him there. Daniel's excuses became thinner, his absences longer. I stopped asking where he was going, because deep down I already knew. The weight of unspoken truths pressed down on me like a heavy fog, suffocating and inescapable. But what really broke me wasn't the lies. It was the way he looked at me, like I was nothing, like I was just some obstacle in his life he had to tolerate. I told myself I wouldn't check his phone again. I wanted to believe that if he was really doing this, he'd at least have the decency to admit it. But he didn't. So I did. It was past midnight when he finally fell asleep, his arm draped lazily over the side of the bed. I sat up slowly, barely breathing as I reached for his phone. The screen was still warm from use. He had been texting someone before he drifted off. Her. My fingers trembled as I opened the messages. And there it was. Can't wait to see you again. Tonight was perfect. You always know how to make me feel special. I felt my breath hitch, my vision blurring as I scrolled further. Messages, calls, photos. A whole relationship unfolding right under my nose. My stomach twisted as I saw something that made my blood run cold. A reservation confirmation at a high-end restaurant. The date? Last week. The night he told me he was working late. Something inside me snapped. I didn't cry. Not yet. I felt numb, like my body was moving on its own as I carefully put the phone back where I found it. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I played along. I made him coffee. I kissed his cheek. I let him think that everything was normal. Because I needed time. Time to decide what came next. But he must have sensed something. That night, as I lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling, he whispered, "Jess, you've been acting weird lately. Is something wrong?" I turned to him, meeting his gaze, forcing a soft smile. "No, Daniel, everything's fine." Because soon it would be, one way or another. I never imagined that the moment my heart finally shattered wouldn't come with screaming or some dramatic confrontation. No, it was quieter than that. It was in the way he laughed. The way Daniel smiled at his phone one evening while I sat across from him at the dinner table, watching. He had no idea I knew, no idea that I had read every single message, had memorized the words he whispered to someone else, the promises he should have been making to me. And yet, there he was, smiling like a man without a care in the world. Like he wasn't slowly ripping my heart apart, piece by piece. Something inside me snapped. I put my fork down. "Who is she?" Daniel barely looked up from his plate. "What?" I repeated myself, slower this time. "Who is she?" There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear, maybe? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same blank, indifferent expression he had been wearing for weeks. "Jessica, don't start." But I wasn't starting. I was ending. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I know, Daniel. I know everything." For the first time in weeks, he really looked at me. His body tensed. His hand gripped his phone a little tighter. But even now, in the face of his own betrayal, he didn't look sorry. He just sighed, like I was an inconvenience, like I was the one ruining the night. I expected him to deny it, maybe even try to gaslight me, make me feel like I was overreacting. But instead, he did something much worse. He smirked. He actually smirked. And then he said it, the words that sealed his fate. "Jessica, you act like I don't have options. Plenty of women want me. You should feel lucky I'm even still here." Lucky. Lucky. I felt my hands tremble, but I refused to let him see me break. I refused to give him the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. Instead, I took a deep breath, and I smiled. "Then go," I said softly. His smirk faltered. "What?" I tilted my head, my voice calm, controlled. If plenty of women want you, Daniel, then go. Be with them. Because I refuse to spend another second with a man who treats me like an option. For the first time, he looked scared. You're being dramatic. I laughed. Laughed. Because if I didn't, I might have screamed. No, Daniel. You were being dramatic when you threw away our marriage for a woman who won't even remember your name in 6 months. His jaw clenched. You don't know that? I shrugged. I guess we'll find out. I turned on my heel and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. I expected him to come after me, to say something, to fight for me. But he didn't. And that was when I knew. I had made the right decision. Because a man who truly loves you doesn't let you walk away without a fight. And Daniel? He just sat there, silent, watching, realizing, far too late, that he had just lost the best thing he ever had. I expected the pain to come crashing down on me the moment I left the house, but all I felt was numbness. My fingers clenched the steering wheel as I drove away, headlights cutting through the darkness, my mind replaying every single moment of that conversation. His smirk, his arrogance, his indifference. I had given this man everything. Years of love, unwavering loyalty, sacrifices he never even acknowledged. And yet, to him, I was just one of many options. The thought made me sick. I didn't go far that night. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, stopping at a quiet overlook where the city lights stretched beneath me like a world I no longer belonged to. I sat there, staring at the view, waiting for the tears to come. But they never did. I wasn't sad. I wasn't broken. I was angry. How dare he? How dare he throw away everything we had built together for the cheap thrill of someone new? How dare he sit there, so sure of himself, so confident that I would never leave, that I would always be waiting, always forgiving, always his. I reached for my phone, half expecting to see a message from him. An apology. A desperate attempt to fix what he had just destroyed. But the screen was empty. No calls, no texts. I almost laughed, of course. He didn't think I'd really leave. And maybe deep down, that's what hurt the most, that he didn't believe I had the strength to walk away from him. That, after everything, he still thought he could treat me like a backup plan, and I would stay. I spent that night at my best friend Mia's house. The moment she opened the door and saw my face, she pulled me inside, no questions asked. That's the thing about true friends. They don't need explanations to know when you're drowning. We sat on her couch, legs tucked under blankets, a glass of wine in each hand. Tell me everything, she said softly. So I did. I told her about the late nights, the distance, the messages I found. I told her about the way he looked at me like I was disposable, replaceable. I told her about those final words, the moment he said, "Plenty of women want me." Mia's grip on her wine glass tightened. I hope he chokes on his own arrogance. I let out a breathless laugh, but it wasn't enough to ease the ache in my chest. He really thought I'd stay. Mia shook her head, eyes burning with fury on my behalf. Jessica, he's a fool. He just lost the best thing that ever happened to him, and he's too stupid to realize it. I wanted to believe that, but part of me still wondered if he even cared. For the next few days, I waited. I waited for the regret to sink in, for Daniel to realize what he had lost and come crawling back. I imagined the apology text, the phone call, the knock at my door. I imagined his voice breaking, his arrogance shattered, his confidence replaced with desperation. But once again, silence. No messages, no calls. Maybe he really was fine without me. The thought should have devastated me. Instead, it fueled my anger. If he wasn't going to regret losing me, then I would make damn sure he regretted ever taking me for granted. So I cut him off. No calls, no explanations, no dramatic farewell texts. I blocked his number, deleted our pictures, and made a promise to myself. I would not let him take up another second of my life. But then, the first crack appeared. 1 week after I left, I got a message from an unknown number. "Jessica, can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Daniel. Finally. But he wasn't getting the response he expected. I smiled, deleted the message, and moved on. He had his chance, and he threw it away. Days turned into weeks, and I didn't respond to Daniel's message. Not because I didn't see it, but because I wanted him to feel what I felt. The emptiness, the rejection, the harsh reality of realizing that someone you took for granted is truly gone. At first, I thought that would be it. He would try once, get no response, and move on to whatever meaningless fling he had lined up next. But then the messages kept coming. "Jessica, I know you're mad. Just talk to me. I don't want to do this over text. Can we meet? I miss you. Please." I ignored them all. Then came the calls. At first, just once or twice a day. Then dozens. My phone would light up with his name, and every time I let it ring. He was getting desperate, and I loved it. Then, one evening, there was a knock on my door. I knew before I even looked that it was him. I could feel it. That same self-assured presence that once made my heart race. But now, it just filled me with cold satisfaction. I took my time answering. I wanted him to wait, to sweat, to feel that sickening uncertainty he had forced me to endure for so long. When I finally opened the door, there he stood. Daniel, the man who once acted like I was disposable, now looking completely lost. His usually perfect posture was slouched, his confident smirk was gone, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked uncertain. "Jessica," he exhaled like he had been holding his breath. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What do you want, Daniel?" He hesitated like he didn't know where to start. "Can we just talk? Please." I let the silence stretch between us, watching the way his jaw clenched, the way his fingers fidgeted like he couldn't stand not being in control. Finally, I gave him the smallest nod. "Fine. 5 minutes." He stepped inside, but this time, there was no ownership in his presence. No arrogance, no expectation that he could just waltz back into my life. He sat on the couch, rubbing his hands together, searching for words. "I messed up," he admitted, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I was stupid, Jessica. I got caught up in my own ego, and I didn't realize how much I was losing until you were actually gone." I tilted my head. "And what exactly did you lose?" His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "You," he said simply. "I lost you, and it's killing me." For a second, I almost believed him. Almost. But then I remembered. I remembered how easily he had dismissed me, how he had laughed in my face, so sure that I would never leave. I remembered the nights I spent doubting myself, wondering what I had done wrong, while he had been out entertaining his options. I let out a slow breath. "You didn't lose me, Daniel. You threw me away." His eyes flickered with something. Pain, regret, maybe even fear. "Jessica, I know I don't deserve another chance, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "You're right. You don't." He stared at me, the reality of my words finally sinking in. He had expected a fight, a chance to win me back, but I wasn't playing his game anymore. I stood up, walking to the door, holding it open. "Goodbye, Daniel." He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, but he must have seen it in my eyes. The finality. So, for the first time, he did what he never thought he'd have to do. He walked away. I stood there, watching Daniel disappear into the night, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his own mistakes. A part of me had waited for this moment, to see him finally broken, to hear him admit that he had lost me, to know that I had been the one thing he thought he could always replace, but never truly could. But now that it was happening, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt free. For the first time since our relationship had crumbled, I realized something important. This was never about revenge. It wasn't about making him suffer the way I had suffered. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about reclaiming my life, about understanding that walking away from someone who didn't value me wasn't a loss. It was a gain. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, letting out a deep breath. The silence of my apartment wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. I wasn't waiting for his call, his apology, or his validation. I had already given myself everything I needed. The next morning, I woke up to one last message from him. I get it now. I hope one day you can forgive me. But if not, just know that I'll regret losing you for the rest of my life. I stared at the words for a long moment, then deleted the message without responding. Because that was the thing about regret. It was his to carry now, not mine. Rebuilding. Without looking back. In the weeks that followed, I focused on me. Not in the way Daniel had, selfishly, recklessly, but in a way that truly mattered. I poured my energy into my work, into my passions, into the friendships I had neglected while trying to hold on to a man who never deserved me in the first place. I reconnected with old friends, laughed without worry, and slowly but surely, I started feeling whole again. One day, while grabbing coffee at my favorite cafe, I ran into an old coworker, Ethan. We hadn't talked in years, but we had always gotten along well. The conversation was easy, natural, filled with laughter. "Jessica, you seem different," he said, tilting his head slightly. I smiled. "Good different?" He nodded. "Yeah, you seem lighter." I did. I felt lighter. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying someone else's baggage. I wasn't rushing into anything new. But for the first time, I was open to something real. Something built on respect, on mutual effort, on love that didn't need to be fought for because the right person wouldn't make me beg for it in the first place. The final chapter. Knowing your worth. There was a time when I thought love meant fighting for someone, proving my worth, holding on even when it hurt. But now I knew the truth. Real love doesn't require you to lose yourself. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was grateful. Because Daniel's biggest mistake had been the best thing that ever happened to me. It set me free. So to anyone who has ever felt like I did, like you were not enough, like someone else had the power to determine your worth, listen to me when I say this. They don't. And if you ever find yourself wondering whether you should hold on or walk away, choose yourself. Because when the wrong person loses you, the right version of you is finally set free. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to walk away from someone who took you for granted, then you're not alone. Self-worth isn't about proving your value to someone who refuses to see it. It's about knowing when to let go and choose yourself. What do you think? Can people truly change? Or do they only regret losing what they once had? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Scylla Reddit Stories so you never miss another powerful story like this one. See you in the next episode.